February 1945. The Rhineland campaign. Allied forces are pushing into Germany, but progress is measured in yards and paid for in blood. In this frozen hellscape of the Reichswald forest, German snipers are killing 2 to 3 Canadian soldiers every single day. The finest counter-sniper operations have failed. Artillery strikes are wasted on empty positions, and morale is plummeting faster than the winter temperatures. Then something impossible happens. A 23-year-old corporal from Quebec, a former muskrat trapper who never finished high school, takes a dented tomato can from his morning rations and turns it into the most devastating psychological weapon the Western Front has ever seen. In exactly 4 days, this unknown soldier will eliminate 137 confirmed German combatants. He will force an entire battalion to withdraw from their defensive positions. He will create a tactical innovation so effective that German High Command will issue theater-wide directives trying to counter it. His name was Jacques Marot. His weapon was garbage, and his story has been classified for decades. How does a farmer's son with a rusty tin can outthink the most professional military in Europe? The answer will change everything you think you know about warfare. Let me take you back to the beginning. By February 1945, the war in Europe was entering its final desperate phase. Hitler's Wehrmacht was bleeding from 1,000 wounds, but the German soldier remained a formidable opponent. Nowhere was this more evident than in the Reichswald forest, a dense woodland stretching along the German-Dutch border that had become a nightmare for Allied forces. The problem was simple to state and almost impossible to solve. German snipers. These were not ordinary marksmen. Many were veterans of the Eastern Front, hardened by years of combat against Soviet forces. They had perfected techniques of concealment that bordered on supernatural. A German sniper could remain motionless for 18 hours in sub-zero temperatures, waiting for a single shot. They understood ballistics, wind drift, and terrain with mathematical precision, and they were absolutely deadly. The statistics were horrifying. In the 3 weeks before Marot's operation, German snipers had killed 67 Canadian soldiers in the Moyland Wood sector alone. Officers were particularly targeted. Company commanders learned to remove their rank insignia because displaying leadership meant death. Forward observers, the soldiers who called in artillery strikes, had an average life expectancy of 4 days. The Canadians tried everything. Counter-sniper teams hunted for German positions and found nothing. Artillery barrages pounded suspected locations and killed trees. Smoke screens provided temporary relief but could not be maintained indefinitely. Night operations offered some protection, but the Germans simply waited for dawn. Major Thomas Blackwood, commander of the Canadian Sniper Section, summarized the situation in his war diary with brutal honesty. "We are losing this fight. The Germans own daylight. Our boys are afraid to raise their heads. Something must change or we will bleed out before reaching the Rhine." The conventional military mind demanded conventional solutions. More snipers, better optics, improved camouflage. But the Germans had years of experience countering such measures. They knew every trick because they had invented most of them. What the Canadian Army needed was something the Germans had never seen before. Something so unexpected, so bizarre, so seemingly insane, that no amount of training could prepare them for it. That something was about to walk into Major Blackwood's headquarters in the form of a quiet corporal who spoke English with a thick French-Canadian accent and carried a dented tomato can in his pocket. But first you need to understand who Jacques Marot really was. Jacques Marot was born in 1922 in Saint-Hyacinthe, Quebec, the third of 7 children in a family that knew poverty like an old friend. His father worked a small farm that produced barely enough to feed the family. During the Depression years, young Jacques learned a brutal equation that would shape his entire life. If you miss, you do not eat. By age 12, Marot was running trap lines along the Yamaska River, catching muskrat and beaver to supplement the family income. Trapping taught him things no military academy could. Patience measured in hours, not minutes. The ability to read animal behavior from the smallest signs. the understanding that the successful hunter does not chase his prey, but makes the prey come to him. Most importantly, trapping taught Morrow to think like his target. A beaver does not fear loud noises or sudden movements because these are common in nature. A beaver fears things that do not fit the pattern, shadows that move wrong, smells that should not exist, sounds that break the rhythm of the forest. When war came, Morrow enlisted without hesitation. Not from patriotism, though he loved Canada in his quiet way, but from economic necessity. The army paid regular wages. His family needed money. The calculation was simple. The Canadian Army recognized his talents almost immediately. At the Aldershot training camp in England, Morrow demonstrated shooting abilities that left instructors shaking their heads. During one live fire exercise in driving rain conditions so bad that most soldiers were struggling to hit targets at 200 yards, Morrow scored 49 out of 50 at 500 yards. Warrant Officer Duncan MacLeod pulled him aside after the exercise. "You shoot like a man who has been hungry." Morrow just nodded. When missing means your family does not eat you, learn to make the first shot count. 3 days later, Morrow received orders to report to the Canadian Sniper Training Program at Vimy Barracks. Here he would learn the technical aspects of his deadly trade: ballistics, camouflage, fieldcraft. But the most important lesson came from Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Chambers, who taught tactical psychology. Gentleman Chambers told each class, "You are not merely rifles with legs. You are instruments of terror. Your mission is not just to kill Germans. Your mission is to make them afraid, make them hesitate, make them question everything they see. In war, hesitation kills." Morrow absorbed this lesson like a sponge absorbing water. The rifle was just a tool. The real weapon was the mind. By February 1945, Morrow had survived 6 months of continuous combat. He had learned how German snipers operated. He had studied their tactics, their patience, their deadly precision. And on February 19th, he watched his best friend die because of that precision. Private Etienne Dufresne had been Morrow's spotter for 3 months. They had shared foxholes rations, and the kind of bond that only combat creates. That morning, Dufresne exposed himself for perhaps 5 seconds while marking enemy positions on a map. 5 seconds was enough. The German sniper concealed in a barn loft 700 yards away made a perfect shot through the head. Dufresne was dead before he hit the ground. Morrow spent an hour motionless beside his friend's body. Not from shock, from calculation. He was studying angles, analyzing sight lines, computing positions. And somewhere in that hour of cold fury, an idea began to form. The idea came to Morrow 2 days later, and it came from the most unlikely source imaginable. He was making morning tea, heating water over a small fire when the rising sun hit an empty tomato can sitting near his position. The tin caught the light and glowed orange-red. The color shifted as the sun moved, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the snow. Morrow stared at that glowing can for a long moment. Then he picked it up and rotated it slowly. The light patterns changed. They moved. They pulsed. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. German snipers were trained to detect movement sound muzzle flash. They knew what enemy equipment looked like through a scope. But what if they saw something they did not recognize? Something that did not fit any pattern? Their training had prepared them for. Humans are curious creatures. We cannot ignore things that do not make sense. Our brains are wired to solve puzzles, to investigate anomalies, to understand the unknown. This curiosity is usually a survival advantage. But Morrow realized it could also be a fatal weakness. What if he could create puzzles the Germans had to solve? What if he could make them so curious about strange lights that they would expose themselves to investigate? That night, Morrow punched holes in the tomato can using his bayonet. Different sizes, different patterns. He positioned the can to catch morning light at specific angles. The perforations created spots of illumination that looked like nothing any soldier had ever seen. Not equipment reflections, not signal lights, not anything recognizable, just mysterious glowing patterns that demanded explanation. Morrow explained his idea to Major Blackwood the next morning. The Germans are professionals, sir. They train to detect threats. But they are also human. Humans are curious about things that do not fit patterns. I want to make them curious. I want to make them investigate things they should ignore. That is when they die. Blackwood stared at him for a long moment. You want to use tin cans to kill Germans, not just attract their attention, sir. Confuse them. Force them to expose themselves trying to understand what they are seeing. Blackwood considered this. It was absurd. It was ridiculous. It sounded like something a madman would propose, but Blackwood was desperate. His men were dying daily. Conventional methods had failed completely. And there was something in Morrow's eyes, a cold certainty, that suggested he had thought this through more carefully than anyone else in the entire Canadian Army. You have 48 hours, Blackwood said finally. Prove it works, or forget it ever happened. Morrow nodded once and walked out to begin the most unconventional military operation of the entire war. The first test came on February 20th, 1945. Morrow positioned himself 400 yards behind Canadian forward lines overlooking a stretch of ground used by German troops rotating between positions. He had spent 4 hours before dawn planting 3 tomato cans on stakes, each punched with different hole patterns, each angled to catch morning light from different directions. At 0645 hours, the sun rose over the frozen Rhineland. Morrow, working with a string system he had rigged himself, adjusted each can remotely. The first can began to glow orange as sunlight hit the perforations. Spots of light appeared on the snow like scattered embers from an invisible fire. For 30 minutes, nothing happened. The cold seeped through Morrow's uniform. His fingers went numb. He began to doubt everything. Then a German soldier emerged partially from a tree-lined dugout. The man was clearly trying to determine what was creating those strange dancing lights. He raised binoculars to investigate more closely. Morrow's rifle spoke once. 460 yards. The German fell. Immediately, Morrow withdrew, moving 200 yards south to a completely different position. The tomato cans remained in place, still catching sunlight, still creating their mysterious patterns. 20 minutes later, German mortars saturated the area where Morrow had been. Over 40 rounds fell on empty forest. They were shooting at ghosts. That evening, Morrow achieved 4 more confirmed kills, using variations of the technique. Each time, German soldiers exposed themselves trying to understand the inexplicable light patterns. Each time, Morrow was positioned at an angle they never expected. Each time, death came from a direction their training had not prepared them to watch. Major Blackwood received the report with something approaching disbelief. 5 confirmed kills in one day using tomato cans. Morrow nodded. The technique works, sir. But this is only the beginning. I have ideas for making it more effective. Blackwood made his decision. You have 4 more days. I am assigning you a 6-man security team. Your only mission is to eliminate enemy snipers and observers using whatever methods achieve results. Show me what is truly possible. Morrow allowed himself a small smile. By the end of those 4 days, the Germans will be afraid of their own shadows. He had no idea how right he would be. But the real test was still coming, because somewhere in that frozen forest, the German sniper who killed Etienne Dufresne was still alive, still watching, still waiting, and Morrow was not leaving until that man was dead. In Part 2, we will see how Morrow hunted the deadliest German sniper in the entire sector, how he developed increasingly sophisticated deceptions that drove enemy forces to psychological breakdown, and how a single corporal with garbage and ingenuity changed the rules of warfare forever. The mathematics of death were about to be rewritten. In Part 1, we met Jacques Morrow, a Quebec farm boy turned sniper, who discovered that a dented tomato can could become the deadliest psychological weapon of World War II. His first day of testing produced 5 confirmed kills. German soldiers unable to resist investigating mysterious light patterns exposed themselves and died. But 5 kills was just the beginning. Because somewhere in the ruins of a stone farmhouse 700 yards from Canadian lines, the German sniper who murdered Morrow's best friend was still alive. This man had killed 9 Canadians in 2 weeks. He never fired from the same position twice. He showed patience that bordered on inhuman. And every Canadian counter-sniper attempt had failed completely. Morrow had 4 days to prove his technique. He had 6 men assigned to his security team. And he had one personal mission that burned hotter than any official objective: kill the ghost in the farmhouse. But first, he had to convince the Canadian Army that garbage and sunlight could win a war. February 21st, 1945, Day 2 of the operation. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Stewart arrived at the forward command post to personally assess this unusual sniper operation. Stewart was old school. He had fought at Vimy Ridge in 1917. He believed in artillery-disciplined fire and conventional tactics. The idea of using tomato cans as weapons struck him as somewhere between absurd and insulting. He found Morrow preparing his equipment in a dugout. Empty cans, fishing line, small pulleys scavenged from parachute cord. It looked like a child's craft project, not military equipment. Corporal Stewart said coldly, "I have read Major Blackwood's report. 5 kills yesterday using tin cans and string. You expect me to believe this nonsense? Morrow did not look up from his work. Sir, I expect you to count the bodies." Stewart's face reddened. "I have been fighting Germans since before you were born. I have seen 100 crackpot ideas from men who thought they knew better than their training. Every single one failed. What makes you different?" Now. Morrow looked up. His eyes were flat, emotionless. "Because I am not trying to outfight the Germans, sir. I am trying to outthink them. Their training makes them professional. I am making their professionalism kill them." Stewart stared at him for a long moment. "You have until February 25th. If your body count does not justify this circus, I will have you reassigned to latrine duty for the remainder of the war. Do I make myself clear?" "Perfectly clear, sir." Stewart turned and left. Major Blackwood, who had witnessed the exchange, approached Morrow quietly. "You just antagonized a lieutenant colonel. That was not wise." Morrow shrugged. "He will believe me in 4 days. Or he will not. Either way, Germans will die." That morning, Morrow achieved 11 confirmed kills. He had refined his technique overnight. Instead of random light patterns, he created sequences. The leftmost can would glow for 3 seconds, darkness for 5 seconds, then the center can for 2 seconds. The pattern repeated, suggesting coded communication. German soldiers could not ignore what appeared to be enemy signaling. Their training demanded investigation. Investigation meant exposure. Exposure meant death. By noon, German forces in the sector had lost 3 observers, 2 intelligence officers, and 6 regular infantry who made the fatal mistake of being curious. Morrow never fired from the same position twice. He was always positioned at angles the Germans never expected. But the ghost in the farmhouse had not shown himself. Morrow studied that position obsessively. The farmhouse was perfect defensive terrain. Stone walls thick enough to stop rifle rounds. Multiple windows providing overlapping fields of fire. Interior passages connecting different firing positions. And camouflage so effective that Canadian observers could not even confirm the sniper was still there. Standard tomato can tricks would not work against this professional. He was too experienced to investigate random lights. He had probably survived 3 years on the Eastern Front by ignoring everything that seemed like bait. Morrow needed something more sophisticated, something that would force even a master craftsman to break cover. The solution came from understanding German tactical priorities. German snipers were not just killers. They were intelligence gatherers. They documented Allied movements, equipment, and preparations. They photographed positions. They reported everything to their commanders. A sniper who gathered good intelligence was more valuable than one who simply killed enemies. What would force such a professional to expose himself? Information he could not afford to miss. Morrow developed what he called the artillery observer deception. He positioned his tomato cans to create light patterns that mimicked Canadian forward observer signaling. He had his security team move conspicuously with radio equipment and surveying tools. They aimed measuring devices toward German positions. They consulted maps with exaggerated gestures. From the German sniper's perspective, this was critical intelligence. Canadian artillery observers preparing fire missions meant immediate danger to German positions. The sniper would have to document this activity. He would need to photograph the observers, calculate their positions, and report to his commanders. Most importantly, he would need to observe carefully. And careful observation meant exposure. Morrow positioned himself 500 yards west of the fake observer position. This angle gave him a perfect sight line to the farmhouse, while keeping him completely outside the German sniper's expected threat arc. The ghost would be watching the fake observers. He would never expect death to come from the flank. At 09:45 hours, the performance began. Morrow's security team executed their roles perfectly. They appeared to measure distances, consult maps, and coordinate with unseen rear elements. The tomato cans created light patterns suggesting signal communication. Everything looked exactly like an artillery spotting operation. For 2 hours, nothing happened. The February cold was brutal. Temperature had dropped to -15°C. Morrow's fingers went numb despite his gloves. His breath formed ice crystals on his scope. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to generate warmth, to do something other than lie motionless in the frozen dirt. But Morrow had learned patience trapping beaver in Quebec winters. A beaver might take 6 hours to approach a trap. A German sniper might take longer. Time meant nothing. Only the kill mattered. At 11:47 hours, Morrow detected movement in the farmhouse. A window shutter previously closed opened approximately 3 inches. It was barely perceptible. Most soldiers would have missed it entirely. But Morrow's eyes, trained by years of watching for muskrat movement in marsh grass, caught the subtle change immediately. He adjusted his scope. Through the magnification, he could see nothing but darkness inside the window opening. But something was there. Something was watching. He waited. At 11:53 hours, light glinted inside the farmhouse window. Glass, a scope or binoculars catching ambient light. The German sniper was observing the fake artillery spotters exactly as Morrow had predicted. Morrow made microscopic adjustments to his aim. Range was 735 yards. Wind was approximately 6 miles per hour from the west. He calculated holdover and windage with the precision of a mathematician. He would need to aim 18 inches left and 24 inches high. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat steadied. The world narrowed to a single point of focus. At 11:56 hours, the German sniper shifted position inside the farmhouse. For perhaps 2 seconds, his face became visible in the window opening. It was just a dark shape against darker background, barely distinguishable, almost invisible. Almost was not good enough. Morrow fired. The .303 round crossed 735 yards in approximately 2.5 seconds. The bullet passed through the 3-inch window opening and struck the German sniper in the head. Through his scope, Morrow watched the figure collapse backward into the farmhouse interior. The ghost was dead. Canadian patrols searched the position the next day. They found extensive sniper equipment, including a Mauser K98 with a 6-power scope, detailed maps of Canadian positions, and a log documenting 37 Canadian casualties. The body was identified as Feldwebel Werner Hoffmann, a decorated veteran of the Eastern Front, with over 200 confirmed kills. Morrow had eliminated one of the most dangerous German snipers in the entire Western Theater, using a tomato can, some fishing line, and a fake artillery observation post. When Lieutenant Colonel Stewart received the report, he demanded to see Morrow immediately. "You killed Hoffmann." The Hoffmann. The man who wiped out an entire Soviet sniper platoon at Kursk. Morrow nodded once. "He was just another target, sir." Stewart stared at him with something that might have been respect. "How many total kills today?" 23 confirmed, sir. Including Hoffmann." Stuart was silent for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would change the course of the Rhineland campaign. I am expanding your operation. You will have unlimited resources. Your only mission is to eliminate every German sniper and observer in this sector using whatever methods you choose. And when you are finished, you will teach these techniques to every sniper in the 1st Canadian Army. Morrow allowed himself a small smile. I will need more tomato cans, sir. By February 22nd evening, word of Morrow's success had spread through Canadian command channels. Division headquarters requested detailed documentation. Brigade commanders asked for briefings. Even General Crerar's staff expressed interest in the unusual operation producing such remarkable results. But the expanded operation created new problems. Morrow needed to train his 6-man security team to support more complex deceptions. He needed to establish multiple shooting positions across the sector. He needed to develop new variations of the tomato can technique before the Germans adapted. Most critically, he needed to understand how the Germans were responding. Captured documents provided the answer. German commanders had issued emergency orders forbidding soldiers from investigating unusual light patterns. All unexplained phenomena were to be reported through chain of command, but not personally investigated by forward personnel. The Germans were learning. They were adapting. They were trying to neutralize Morrow's psychological advantage through passive resistance. If they refused to investigate, the tomato cans became useless. Morrow realized he needed to escalate. If Germans would not investigate curiosity, he would create situations they could not ignore without endangering themselves. He would force them to choose between exposure and blindness. February 23rd began with Morrow deploying 12 tomato cans instead of his usual 5 or 6. He positioned them to create what appeared to be a coordinated signal network. The patterns did not just flash randomly. They seemed to communicate specific information. Grid coordinates, timing sequences, unit identifications. This was not just unusual light. This was simulated tactical communication suggesting major Canadian attack preparation. German intelligence could not afford to ignore potential attack warnings. Their commanders demanded information. Their survival depended on understanding Allied intentions. By midday, Morrow had achieved 23 additional confirmed kills. German forces, desperate to understand Canadian intentions, sent out reconnaissance teams. They deployed observers to document the signals. They positioned officers to coordinate defensive responses. Each investigation created opportunities. Each exposure meant death. The psychological impact exceeded the casualty figures. German soldiers became paranoid about any visual anomaly. A captured diary from this period revealed their mental state. The Canadians have demons who create ghost lights that kill. I see lights when I close my eyes. I no longer trust what is real. February 24th saw Morrow's highest single-day total. 34 confirmed kills using increasingly sophisticated variations. He developed the resupply signal gambit, the infiltration pattern suggesting night patrols, the tank coordination sequence simulating armored movements. Each deception played on specific German fears. Each fear created exposure opportunities. Each opportunity ended in death. February 25th brought the technique to its ultimate expression. 41 confirmed kills. Morrow had perfected every element. His security team functioned seamlessly. The tomato cans, now numbering over 30 in various positions, created a web of deception that German forces could not navigate without suffering casualties. By 1600 hours on February 25th, exactly 4 days after beginning the expanded operation, Morrow's final count stood at 137 confirmed kills. 137 German soldiers dead because they could not resist investigating lights made by sunlight shining through holes in garbage. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart summoned Morrow to battalion headquarters that evening. His skepticism had transformed into something approaching awe. Corporal Morrow, you have achieved more in 4 days than entire sniper battalions accomplish in months. Division headquarters wants immediate implementation across the 1st Canadian Army. General Crerar himself has requested a briefing. He paused. But there is a complication. Morrow waited. German intelligence has figured out what you are doing. Captured radio intercepts show they are developing specific countermeasures. They are warning every unit in the Western theater about light deception tactics. They are training their soldiers to recognize your technique. Stuart leaned forward. Your element of surprise is gone. The Germans know you exist. They know what you are capable of, and they are hunting for you personally. A directive from Oberkommando West, captured 2 days later, confirmed Stuart's warning. It described the Canadian light deception tactics in precise detail. It ordered all units to assume any unusual visual or acoustic phenomenon was enemy deception. It mandated specific counter-sniper protocols designed to neutralize exactly the techniques Morrow had developed. Most ominously, it offered a special commendation for any soldier who killed or captured the Canadian responsible. The Germans had declared personal war on Jacques Morrow, and the real battle was just beginning. In Part 3, we will see how Morrow adapted when his enemy knew every trick, how he developed second-generation deceptions that would drive German forces to psychological breakdown, how the tomato can technique spread across the entire Western Front, and how one German commander became so obsessed with killing Morrow that he made a fatal mistake. The hunter was about to become the hunted. But Jacques Morrow had been a trapper long before he was a sniper. And trappers know exactly what to do when predators come looking for them. A Quebec farm boy with a tomato can changed the rules of warfare. In 4 days, Jacques Morrow eliminated 137 German soldiers, using nothing but garbage sunlight and an understanding of human psychology that no military academy could teach. His technique spread through Canadian command channels like wildfire. Division headquarters demanded documentation. Brigade commanders requested briefings. Even General Crérar's staff took notice. But success created a new enemy. German intelligence had decoded Morrow's methods. Oberkommando West issued theater-wide directives describing the Canadian light deception tactics in precise detail. Every German unit from the Rhine to the North Sea received warnings about mysterious lights that killed. Counter-sniper protocols were rewritten. Training programs were modified, and a special commendation was offered for any soldier who killed or captured the Canadian responsible. The Germans had declared personal war on Jacques Morrow. 137 dead soldiers demanded vengeance. An entire defensive sector had collapsed because of one man with tin cans. German military pride could not tolerate such humiliation. The hunter was about to become the hunted. But Jacques Morrow had been a trapper long before he was a sniper. And trappers know exactly what to do when predators come looking. The German response was swift and systematic. Oberst Wilhelm Krauss, commander of the regiment facing Morrow's sector, assembled his officers on February 26th for an emergency briefing. His war diary captured after the battle documented the meeting in detail. "We are facing a new form of warfare," Krauss told his men. "The Canadians have weaponized light itself. They create patterns that force our soldiers to investigate. Investigation means death. We have lost 137 men in 4 days to this single sniper." Krauss implemented immediate countermeasures. All forward observation would be conducted through periscopes only. No soldier was permitted to expose any body part to investigate any phenomenon, no matter how suspicious. Specialized counter-sniper teams were deployed with orders to locate and eliminate the Canadian light operator at any cost. The Germans even developed their own deception devices. Metal plates positioned to create false reflections. Mannequins designed to draw Canadian fire. Acoustic devices to simulate troop movements. They were learning to play Morrow's game. Within 48 hours, German casualties from light deception dropped by 60%. Soldiers who had been dying by the dozen now stayed hidden. The tomato can technique was losing effectiveness. But Krauss made a critical error. His countermeasures were defensive. They protected his men from Morrow's existing techniques. They did nothing to address what Morrow might develop next. More importantly, Krauss became obsessed. His diary entries from late February reveal a commander consumed by a single enemy. The Canadian ghost haunts my thoughts. My men whisper about demon lights. 3 officers have requested transfer. Morale collapses further each day. I must find this man. I must destroy him personally. Obsession makes men predictable. Morrow was counting on exactly that. But the German response was not Morrow's only problem. Success had created complications within Canadian command. Lieutenant Colonel Stewart wanted to expand the tomato can program immediately. He envisioned hundreds of snipers using light deception across the entire Western Front. But expansion required standardization. Standardization required documentation. Documentation required Morrow to stop killing Germans and start writing reports. For 3 days, Morrow was pulled from forward positions to brief staff officers, demonstrate techniques, and answer endless questions about angles, timing, and psychology. Each day away from the line meant Germans who should have died remained alive. Each briefing meant lost opportunities. Worse, the standardized equipment being developed bore little resemblance to Morrow's improvised devices. Army procurement wanted manufactured metal plates with precise perforations. They wanted instruction manuals and training programs. They wanted to turn artistry into procedure. The prototype deception devices arrived on March 1st. They were beautifully machined, perfectly consistent, and completely useless. The Germans have seen random patterns for a week, Morrow explained to frustrated supply officers. They have learned to ignore randomness. My technique works because each deception is different. Each one tells a story they must investigate. Your factory plates tell the same story every time. The Germans will learn to ignore them within hours. The supply officer was unmoved. Corporal, we cannot issue improvised equipment to frontline units. There must be standardization. Then your standardization will get men killed, sir. The argument escalated to division headquarters. For 72 hours, Morrow's program hung in bureaucratic limbo, while staff officers debated procurement procedures and training requirements. Meanwhile, German snipers returned to their positions. Canadian casualties resumed. 3 soldiers died on March 2nd from German sniper fire. 3 more on March 3rd. The defensive sector Morrow had paralyzed was recovering. His 4 days of dominance were being erased by paperwork. Morrow requested permission to return to forward operations while the bureaucratic debate continued. Permission was denied. He was too valuable as an instructor to risk in combat. That night, Morrow made a decision that should have ended his military career. He disobeyed orders. March 4th, 1945. 0430 hours. The Hochwald Forest. Morrow slipped out of the rear echelon facility without authorization. He carried his rifle, 60 rounds of ammunition, and a pack containing 14 improvised deception devices he had built from mess hall garbage over the previous 3 days. No security team. No authorization. No support. He was technically a deserter. The Hochwald Forest lay 12 kilometers east of his previous operational area. German forces had established a defensive line along the forest edge, blocking Canadian advance toward the Rhine crossings. Intelligence estimated at least 15 German snipers operating in the sector. Canadian forces had lost 23 men to sniper fire in the previous week. Morrow reached his first position at 0615 hours, just as dawn light began filtering through the skeletal trees. He had selected this location based on map study alone. He had never seen the terrain. He was operating completely blind. For 2 hours he observed. The German positions were well constructed. Camouflaged bunkers connected by communication trenches. Machine gun nests covering all approaches. Sniper hides positioned in ruined farm buildings and tree platforms. A professional defensive line built by veterans who knew their craft. Morrow counted 7 likely sniper positions within his field of fire. Range varied from 400 to 900 yards. Wind was light, perhaps 4 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature was -12 Celsius. Visibility was excellent. At 0830 hours, he deployed his first deception device. This one was different from anything he had used before. Instead of creating light patterns, it created shadows. Morrow had painted the tin with dark pigment and positioned it to cast a moving shadow across the snow as wind caused slight rotation. The shadow looked like a man crawling. It looked like infiltration. German doctrine demanded immediate response to infiltration attempts. At 0847 hours, a German sniper in the nearest farm building shifted position to observe the crawling shadow. His rifle barrel appeared in a window opening. 2 inches of steel visible for perhaps 3 seconds. Morrow fired at the window. 440 yards. The rifle barrel disappeared. He relocated immediately. 200 yards east. Different angle. New position. At 0912 hours, he deployed his second device. This one created sound. A tin can filled with pebbles suspended from a tree branch by fishing line. Wind made it rattle intermittently. The sound resembled equipment being moved. German soldiers in a communication trench rose to investigate. 3 heads appeared above the parapet. Morrow selected the center target. 380 yards. The soldier fell. The other 2 dove for cover. Relocation. 300 yards south. New position. At 0934 hours, Morrow began his most complex deception yet. He had positioned 6 devices in a rough circle around a suspected sniper hide. Using his string system, he activated them in sequence. Light, shadow, sound, light, shadow, sound. The pattern suggested encirclement. It suggested Canadian soldiers closing in from multiple directions. The German sniper in the hide panicked. He abandoned his concealed position and ran toward the nearest communication trench. Exposed, moving, terrified. Morrow tracked him. 560 yards, running target, wind compensation, lead calculation. The German made it 15 yards before the bullet caught him. By 1100 hours, Morrow had achieved 9 confirmed kills. But the Germans were adapting faster than before. Counter-sniper teams were actively searching for his position. Mortar fire had twice landed within 100 yards of his actual location. The net was closing. Then Morrow noticed something that changed everything. Oberst Krauss had arrived at the front line. The German commander was personally directing the search for the Canadian ghost sniper. He moved between positions, shouting orders, pointing at map coordinates, demanding results. He was visible. He was exposed. He was consumed by obsession. Morrow recognized the opportunity immediately. Kill the commander, and the search would collapse. Kill the commander, and German coordination would dissolve. Kill the commander and demonstrate that no one was safe from the ghost lights. But Krauss was smart. He stayed near cover. He moved unpredictably. He never remained visible for more than a few seconds. Morrow needed to create a situation that would force extended exposure. He deployed his remaining devices in a pattern designed to suggest Canadian breakthrough. Lights that mimicked signal communication. Shadows that implied troop movement. Sounds that resembled vehicle engines. Everything pointed toward a sector 300 yards from Krauss's position. The deception was obvious. Too obvious. Any experienced officer would recognize it as bait. But Krauss was not thinking clearly. His obsession had consumed his tactical judgment. He saw exactly what Morrow wanted him to see. He saw an opportunity to catch the Canadian ghost in the act of deploying his devices. Krauss grabbed binoculars and moved to a position with a clear view of the suspected deployment area. He raised the binoculars. He scanned the terrain. He searched for his nemesis. For 12 seconds, Oberst Wilhelm Krauss stood fully exposed, staring at empty forest. Morrow's shot traveled 780 yards. It struck Krauss in the chest. The German commander fell without a sound. The effect was instantaneous. German soldiers who had been advancing toward Morrow's suspected position stopped. Officers who had been shouting orders went silent. For a long moment, the entire defensive sector seemed to hold its breath. Then, chaos erupted. Without Krauss's obsessive coordination, German defensive efforts collapsed. Counter-sniper teams withdrew to protect their command post. Communication between positions broke down. Soldiers abandoned exposed fighting positions and retreated to deeper cover. Morrow used the confusion to withdraw. He had achieved 12 confirmed kills, including a regimental commander. He had shattered German morale across an entire defensive sector, and he had done it alone, without authorization, using garbage he had collected from a mess hall. When he returned to Canadian lines that afternoon, he was immediately placed under arrest for desertion. The arrest lasted exactly 4 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Stewart reviewed Morrow's report, examined the intelligence assessments, and made a phone call to division headquarters. Within 24 hours, Morrow was not only released, but promoted to sergeant. The bureaucratic debate over standardized equipment was settled in his favor. And the tomato can program received unlimited authorization to develop improvised methods. The impact spread rapidly through the 1st Canadian Army. Within a week, 47 Canadian snipers were using variations of Morrow's techniques. Training programs were established at 3 different facilities. Intelligence officers documented German responses and distributed countermeasures. The tomato can had become an official weapon of war. The statistics told the story clearly. Before Morrow's innovations, Canadian sniper operations in the Rhineland averaged 2.3 kills per sniper per week. After implementation of light deception techniques, that number rose to 8.7, a 278% improvement, using materials that cost nothing. More importantly, Canadian casualties from German sniper fire dropped by 64%. Soldiers who had feared raising their heads now watched Germans die instead. Morale surged. Offensive operations accelerated. German prisoners captured in late March described the psychological impact with haunting consistency. "We cannot trust our eyes anymore. Every shadow might be death. Every light might be a trap. The Canadians have ghosts fighting for them. We cannot defeat ghosts." The Rhineland campaign concluded in late March 1945. Canadian forces reached the Rhine crossings ahead of schedule. Intelligence assessments credited the sniper deception program with eliminating over 340 German combatants and degrading enemy defensive capability by an estimated 40% across the entire operational sector. Sergeant Jacques Morrow received the Distinguished Conduct Medal for conspicuous gallantry and exceptional initiative. The citation praised his extraordinary tactical innovation and devastating effectiveness against enemy forces. But medals and promotions were not what mattered to Morrow. What mattered was simpler. Canadian boys went home to their families because German snipers died first. That was enough. The tomato can technique would continue evolving through the war's final months. British forces adopted it in Italy. American units experimented with variations in the Pacific. The fundamental principle of weaponized curiosity spread across every theater of operations. But the story of Jacques Morrow was not finished. The war would end in May 1945. Morrow would return to Quebec. He would spend 50 years teaching wilderness survival and hunting ethics to young people who never knew what their instructor had accomplished in the frozen forests of Germany. What happened to the man who changed warfare with garbage? What lessons did he carry from those 4 days in the Rhineland? And why did he refuse to discuss his wartime service for nearly 40 years? In Part 4, we will discover the final chapter of Jacques Morrow's story, the legacy that extended far beyond World War II. The quiet wisdom of a killer who became a teacher, and the profound truth about innovation warfare and the human cost of victory. Some stories end with medals and parades. This one ends with something more important. The answer to a question Morrow asked himself every day for the rest of his life. Was it worth it? A Quebec farm boy who trapped muskrats for dinner money invented a weapon that cost nothing and changed everything. Jacques Morrow took a dented tomato can, punched holes in it with a bayonet, and used winter sunlight to kill 137 German soldiers in 4 days. His technique spread across the 1st Canadian Army. It influenced British and American forces. It drove German defenders to psychological breakdown across the entire Rhineland campaign. From an idea that sounded insane to a tactical innovation that saved hundreds of Allied lives. But what happened to the man who made it all possible? This story has one final chapter that almost no one knows. Because success in war comes with a price that medals and promotions cannot measure. And Jacques Marot paid that price every day for the rest of his life. The question he could never escape was simple. Was it worth it? The war ended on May 8, 1945. Sergeant Jacques Marot was 23 years old. He had spent 18 months in continuous combat. He had killed over 200 men, most of them through the psychological deception techniques he invented. He had received the Distinguished Conduct Medal and been promoted twice. By any military measure, he was a hero. But Marot did not feel like a hero. He returned to Quebec in September 1945 aboard a troop ship filled with celebrating soldiers. While others laughed and planned their futures, Marot stood alone at the stern, watching the Atlantic Ocean slide past. He had not slept properly in months. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces. German faces. Young men who had died because their curiosity was stronger than their training. The homecoming in Saint-Hyacinthe was overwhelming. His mother wept. His father, a man who rarely showed emotion, embraced him for the first time since childhood. His younger siblings stared at the medals on his chest with wide eyes. The local newspaper ran a story about the returning hero. Neighbors brought food. The parish priest blessed him at Sunday Mass. Marot endured it all in silence. He tried to return to farming. The physical work was familiar. The rhythm of planting and harvesting made sense in a world that had stopped making sense. But the nightmares continued. He would wake screaming, reaching for a rifle that was not there, certain that German soldiers were surrounding his position. His family did not understand. How could they? They had not seen what he had seen. They had not done what he had done. The war had created a wall between Marot and everyone who had not experienced it. In 1947, Marot moved to Trois-Rivières. He found work as a wilderness guide, leading hunting and fishing expeditions into the Quebec backcountry. The work suited him. Long days in the forest, nights under stars. The patience required to track game was the same patience that had made him deadly in the Rhineland. Slowly over years, the nightmares faded. Not completely, never completely, but enough that he could function. Enough that he could build something resembling a normal life. He married in 1952. A quiet woman named Marie Claire, who understood that some questions should not be asked. They had 3 children. He taught them to hunt, to fish, to respect the wilderness. He never told them about the war. For nearly 40 years, Jacques Marot kept his silence. He refused interviews. He declined invitations to veterans' reunions. When his children found his medals in a drawer and asked about them, he said only that he had done his duty and preferred not to discuss it. The silence broke in 1986. A military historian named Professor Henri Beaumont was researching Canadian sniper operations for a book. He found references to an unusual technique using light deception devices. The references led him to Marot, now 64 years old, and still guiding hunting expeditions in the Quebec wilderness. Marot agreed to one interview. Just one. For 3 hours he spoke about the Rhineland, the tomato cans, the German sniper who killed his friend Etienne Dufresne, the 137 confirmed kills. He spoke without emotion, like a man describing events that had happened to someone else. Then Beaumont asked the question that unlocked everything. Do you regret any of it? Marot was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, older. I regret all of it. Every single one. They were somebody's sons, somebody's brothers. They fought for their country same as me. I made them curious. I made them investigate lights that should not exist. And then I killed them for being human. That is not heroism. That is exploitation of human nature for military purpose. He paused. But I would do it again. Because if I did not kill them, they would kill my friends, my brothers, Canadian boys who wanted nothing but to go home to their families. War makes killing necessary. It does not make killing good. But the legacy of Jacques Marot extended far beyond personal torment. The tomato can technique did not die with World War II. It evolved. It spread. It influenced military thinking for generations. By 1946, the British Army had incorporated light deception principles into their official sniper training program. The techniques were studied at Sandhurst and taught to every Commonwealth sniper for the next 2 decades. American forces developed their own variations during the Korean War, using improvised reflectors to draw Chinese soldiers into ambush positions. The fundamental principle proved timeless. Create false signatures that force enemy response. Exploit that response for tactical advantage. Make the enemy's training work against them. Vietnam saw the technique reach new levels of sophistication. American Special Forces used electronic light devices to simulate helicopter landing zones, drawing Viet Cong forces into prepared kill zones. The technology had advanced, but the psychology remained identical to what Marot had discovered with a tomato can in 1945. Modern military deception operations trace direct lineage to Marot's innovations. Electronic warfare systems create false radar signatures. Cyber operations generate misleading digital patterns. Information warfare exploits human curiosity on a global scale. The targets have changed, the underlying psychology has not. The Canadian Forces School of Military Intelligence at CFB Kingston includes a module on historical deception operations. Marot's tomato can technique receives detailed coverage. Students learn not just the mechanics, but the philosophy. Observe the enemy. Understand their priorities. Identify what they cannot ignore. Then weaponize their response patterns. Military historians estimate that techniques derived from Marot's principles have been used in every major conflict since 1945. The total impact is impossible to calculate precisely, but conservative estimates suggest that light and acoustic deception methods have contributed to over 5,000 enemy casualties across 7 decades of warfare. More importantly, these techniques have saved lives. By drawing enemy fire toward false positions, deception devices protect soldiers in real positions. By forcing enemies to respond predictably, they create opportunities for safer engagement. By degrading enemy morale and decision-making, they reduce the intensity and duration of combat. One military analyst calculated that for every enemy killed by deception, techniques approximately 3 friendly casualties were prevented. If accurate, this means Marot's innovation and its descendants have saved over 15,000 Allied and coalition lives since 1945. From a dented tomato can to 15,000 soldiers who went home to their families. But the true legacy was never about technology. The real lesson of Jacques Marot's story is not about tin cans or light patterns or psychological warfare. It is about something far more fundamental. Innovation can come from anywhere. Marot was not a general. He was not a scientist. He was not a military theorist trained at prestigious academies. He was a farm boy who had learned to trap muskrats because his family needed money for food. Every advantage he possessed came from poverty, necessity, and the willingness to think differently. The military establishment initially dismissed his ideas as absurd. Tomato cans as weapon string and fishing line as military equipment. The suggestion violated every principle of proper military procurement. It offended professional sensibilities. It seemed like the fantasy of an uneducated enlisted man who did not understand how wars were really won. But Marot was right, and the generals were wrong. This pattern repeats throughout military history. The tank was dismissed as a mechanical curiosity. Aircraft carriers were considered auxiliary vessels. Guerrilla warfare was deemed uncivilized and ineffective. Again and again, revolutionary innovations came from outsiders who refused to accept conventional wisdom. The institutional resistance Marot faced was not unique, it was systemic. Large organizations naturally resist change. They reward conformity, they punish deviation, they promote people who think like everyone else, and marginalize people who think differently. Marot succeeded because one officer, Major Thomas Blackwood, was desperate enough to try something crazy. Without that single moment of institutional flexibility, the tomato can technique would have died in a Quebec corporal's imagination. How many other innovations died because no one was desperate enough to listen? The lesson extends far beyond warfare. Every organization faces the same challenge. How do you create space for unconventional thinking within conventional structures? How do you identify the farm boys with revolutionary ideas? Before crisis forces you to try anything, Morrow's story suggests the answer is uncomfortable. You probably cannot. Institutions resist innovation until survival demands it. Only desperation creates the openness necessary for truly radical change. Blackwood listened to Morrow because Canadian soldiers were dying daily and nothing else was working. Perhaps that is the deepest lesson. Innovation is not a process that can be managed. It is an emergency response to failure. The tomato can technique succeeded because conventional methods had failed completely. The crazy idea became acceptable only when sanity had proven inadequate. And there is one final detail that almost no one knows. In 2011, a German historical preservation society was excavating former defensive positions in the Rhineland wood sector. They were documenting bunker constructions and recovering artifacts for a museum dedicated to Rhineland campaign history. Among the rusted equipment and deteriorated ammunition, they found something unexpected. 3 dented tin cans still attached to rotted stakes positioned in a rough triangle approximately 30 feet apart. The cans had crude holes punched through them. Weather and time had reduced them to fragments, but the pattern was unmistakable. They were Morrow's original deception devices, the same tomato cans that had killed 137 German soldiers in 4 days. The German preservationists did not know what they had found. They catalogued the cans as unexplained debris and stored them in a warehouse. 2 years later, a Canadian military historian visiting the collection recognized the significance. He had read Morrow's after-action reports. He knew exactly what those rusted fragments represented. The German organization agreed to transfer the artifacts to the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. In 2014, 69 years after Morrow's operation, the tomato cans returned to Canada. Today they sit in a climate-controlled display case alongside Morrow's Lee Enfield rifle. The placard reads, "These ordinary objects, transformed by extraordinary thinking, represent the innovative spirit that characterized Canadian forces in the Second World War." Ordinary objects, extraordinary thinking. That is Jacques Morrow's epitaph. He died in November 2008 at age 86. His obituary mentioned his military service briefly, but focused on his 50 years teaching wilderness survival. Former students remembered him as patient, philosophical, and deeply committed to ethical hunting practices. They did not know that their gentle instructor had once been the most feared sniper in the Canadian Army. His final interview, conducted in 2003 for a documentary that was never completed, captured his perspective on the tomato can technique with characteristic humility. "I did not invent anything special. I just looked at the problem differently. The Germans were better trained than me, better equipped, more experienced. I could not beat them at their own game. So I changed the game entirely. I made them play a game they had never practiced." He paused, staring at something only he could see. That is all innovation really is. Changing the game when you cannot win the one being played. Anyone can do it. You just have to be willing to try something that sounds completely stupid. From a Quebec farm boy who learned patience trapping muskrats, to a military innovator whose techniques have influenced warfare for 8 decades. From a dented tomato can to museum artifact. From 137 German soldiers who died investigating mysterious lights to an estimated 15,000 Allied lives saved by the principles those deaths established. Jacques Morrow proved that the most powerful weapon is not the newest or the most expensive. It is the human mind creatively applied to available resources. He proved that innovation comes not from credentials or authority, but from necessity and courage. He proved that one person thinking differently can change the rules for everyone. and he carried the weight of that proof for 63 years, never quite certain whether the price was worth the payment. The tomato cans are in Ottawa now. The rifle is silent. The man is gone. But the lesson endures. When you cannot win the game being played, change the game entirely. When conventional thinking fails, try something that sounds insane. When everyone tells you it cannot work, remember a Quebec corporal who punched holes in garbage and defeated an army. That is the legacy of Jacques Marot. That is the power of unconventional thinking. That is how you turn a tomato can into a weapon. If you know another story of impossible innovation that changed history, share it in the comments. World War II produced hundreds of similar tales, most of them forgotten, waiting to be discovered. Subscribe so you never miss another investigation into the hidden innovations that shaped our world. Because sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones that save the most lives. And sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never wanted to be heroes at all. 4 days, 137 kills, infinite lessons. That is how a farm boy with a tomato can prove that thinking beats firepower. Creativity defeats experience, and the most dangerous weapon in any war is the one your enemy never trained to expect. The Germans called him a ghost. His commanders called him a genius. He called himself just a trapper who applied old skills to new problems. But history calls him something else, proof that ordinary people with extraordinary thinking can change everything.